Welcome to the Constructive 2020 virtual event series. Constructive is an industry-led effort to enhance collaboration, build resilience, and ensure a vibrant and sustainable future for the industry. Welcome to our second virtual event, Building Residential Sector Resilience. This session is brought to you by Carters. Carters are proud to partner with those who build and construct our country. Constructive 2020 in partnership with Carters, your building partner. Welcome to Constructive 2020.
Yes, kia ora everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to round 2 of Constructive 2020, our webinar series. Great to have you with us. We are here once again from the Wellington waterfront, from the beautiful PwC building. Plenty of activity happening down there on the waterfront today and plenty of activity here as well. We've got a team preparing to receive your questions throughout the afternoon and we look forward to you being part of our discussion about building resilience in the residential sector, such an important topic. So great to have you with us for this conversation. We know that the residential sector is really the backbone of the industry. In fact, it accounted for about 60% of the industry as a whole just before COVID. But we also know that the residential industry is vulnerable to shocks. We saw that after the global financial crisis and other major world events. And we know that those shocks lead to a loss of skills, a loss of knowledge, and of course, jobs and businesses as a whole. And that means that the sector really finds itself playing catch up when that recovery period does arrive. So today we're asking, how do we build resilience in the sector so that it is prepared for the recovery period, so that it's in a strong and stable position when that does arrive? So how are we going to do that? In practical terms, what does that look like? What are the decisions that we need to be making now to put us in that position in the months and years to come? So we're really fortunate today. We're going to hear from a couple of leaders in the sector, many of whom will be well known to you. We've got Aidan Jury from Jenny and Homes and also Campbell Matson from Location Homes, and they'll be sharing their thoughts and insights with us. What have they learnt during lockdown and what are their predictions for what the months to come have in store? We'll then be taking part in a panel discussion. We'll have a couple of other people joining us as well, and we'll be taking your questions. So that chat window is open right now. Feel free to fire whatever you like through, and we'll try and group those into topics that we can put to our panelists and put a bit of shape around that discussion a little bit later on. So let's crack straight into our 2 keynote presentations. We're going to begin with Campbell Matson from Location Homes. Now, Campbell is a leader in vertically integrated construction. He has just stepped down from leading the Taranaki branch of Master Builders. He's also a really strong advocate for mental health in the sector. This is an issue that we see being talked about more and more. We'll talk about it a little bit later as well. And today we're going to hear Campbell's thoughts on lockdown, some of the challenges, but also on a positive, hopeful note. How do we move through this period into the opportunities that lie ahead of us? So welcome, Campbell, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, Jahan, and kia ora, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Going from dancing and eating with thousands at WOMAD to being locked down at home with the family for an undetermined length of time in a matter of 10 days was quite a shock for us all, I'm sure. Little of my previous life experience really prepared me to comprehend and process what was happening in our country as we entered into New Zealand's longest period of self-isolation. As someone who is responsible for the directorship of several companies in the development, construction, timber and hardware industries, my antenna was up about a week before lockdown was announced. The day our borders were closed for the first time in history, I began to appreciate the drastic nature of the government's response and how this may affect our economy. By the time the Prime Minister announced level 3 lockdown on the 23rd of March, our teams had already set out a rough plan on what was required to lock down. We had 2 days to identify and safeguard any elements of our building sites and other businesses that would be vulnerable to being left exposed for long periods of time. Through focus and teamwork, every one of our sites was able to be left vacant for a long time, safe and secure. Our management, design and QS teams all transitioned to home offices and kept working at around 80% throughout the lockdown period. My top priority in the first week of lockdown was to focus on communication, people, processes and systems. Establishing communication channels and setting times for company-wide check-ins proved to be a very effective way of managing the anxieties of our people, both individually and in a group setting. Identifying workflows for each department and maintaining targets for output helped our staff to keep busy and useful, as well as provided real benefits for our companies, which were essentially at a standstill. Focusing our apprentices back onto their theory work gave them purpose and less time to worry. By the beginning of April, I had decided that lockdown was going to be a positive experience for our people and our companies, and set about planning how we would re-enter on-site operations in the strongest way possible. Along with our company leaders, I set our teams up to focus on different elements of our business. Our construction teams were focused with drawing up site operation plans that would allow for contactless site operation. Our finance team got busy negotiating cost relief in certain parts of our business, along with creating multiple cash flow scenarios, and backup finance was prepared in case it was required. Our QS team updated all of our pricing spreadsheets and looked to improve the accuracy and speed with which we can price projects. We quadrupled our investment in marketing content and advertising and ramped up our social media and digital marketing from week 3 of lockdown. As a result of these efforts, our new project inquiry tripled in May and June compared to the year prior. Regular communication with our fantastic current and future clients was great for all of us as we worked our way through this time together. A great mutual respect for our co-reliance became very apparent. Keeping in contact with other sector players and advisors with the same mindset helped me enormously. We were able to discuss and disregard much of the media commentary around the imminent collapse of our industry by reflecting on our collective experiences and knowledge. For example, the reported imminent collapse of construction and housing values did not line up with what we saw, which was a strong forward workbook for many companies, strong migration of permanently returning New Zealanders, historically low and falling cost of money, ongoing net shortage of housing in New Zealand, inevitable stimulation of the economy by central government. Obviously, understanding this helped us in that time, but looking ahead, we realised the threat to our industry is more likely medium term, and action is required to ensure it doesn't come to as bad as it could come. Looking at the resilience of our teams, when facing the uncertain future and what was needed to be done to navigate it well, I came to be reminded that our teams don't expect us as their leaders to do everything. They look to us for confidence, a plan, and guidance. And when they share in the plan and feel empowered to help with the execution of it, great things can happen. As a direct result of COVID-19, our teams have never been more engaged, never been more united in the common goal of achieving quality outcomes for our clients. The sense of team and the we are in this together, let's get through it together attitude has been so humbling and encouraging for me as a company owner. Overall, our businesses are more resilient than I would have thought prior to COVID. The ability and willingness of our teams to adapt and march on was inspiring. By continuing to use modern communication methods, remote information management, app-based project management, and health and safety tools, we were able to operate effectively out of office and away from physical files, apart from our QS, who enjoys running his ruler over the paper. I've come to be glad of the test of character that COVID has offered me personally. I believe it has made me confront some hidden fears about risk of failure and prove to myself again that the best way to deal with a problem is to acknowledge it, identify its perimeter, and then create and execute a plan to deal with it. Very much like any building project, success lies in the direction of planning, preparation, resourcing, and teamwork. With so much uncertainty around the long-term effects of lockdown, I struggled the first week with what I think were different stages of grief, moving through them quickly from shock and denial to anger and depression, and on to acceptance and hope over a 7 to 9 day period. Some of the key things I did to manage my own mental health and anxiety at this time was to spend as much time as possible outside with our wife and children, walking the dog on the beach, keeping off news sites and social media for as much of the day as possible, getting good sleep and eating well, perhaps a little too well. Committing to these habits helped me to stay positive and more resilient than if I hadn't. The true collaboration of many industry players, competitors, and government agencies all aligned to confront the common economic threat before us has given us such a good platform to not only minimise the impact from COVID, but to come back stronger than before. This must continue. Practical policy work by MB, Chazins, and RMBA and others, such as developing plans to facilitate safely returning to work under COVID alert levels, gave our industry such a great head start getting back to our building sites. Some of the policies and procedures developed as a result, like improved site hygiene, sign-in and sign-out protocols, site security, these will remain as permanent minimum standards for all good operators. There have been a number of good learnings from COVID lockdown for me. Number one, our people are everything. And communication is the lifeblood that sustains the health of our teams. I always knew our people were great, but it wasn't until you are forced to critically question the need for every one of them and look at every cost line that you start to realize what each person brings to the team. Having the right people fulfilling the right roles gives a company so much more capacity to weather changes in fortune. Ensuring that each team member is acutely aware of their role and purpose and has ownership of the outcomes makes them committed and ensures higher rates of productivity and lower costs and less mistakes. This increased clarity of purpose is what continues to drive us today, and I have learned that the most important thing I need to maintain as the leader of our businesses is purpose. Investing in our people has never been more important. The time we put into each one of them, understanding what drives them, what bothers them, what success looks like in their lives, as well as upskilling both professionally and personally. COVID has reinforced that the benefit of continual investment into our teams brings greater return and strength to the business, as well as a much happier and unified working environment. This investment returns huge dividends when the resilience of our business is tested. I have been grateful for lessons learned in previous recessions. Having had to lay off 60% of my staff over a 1-month period during the GFC, some of them very experienced carpenters, it near on broke my heart. I have learnt the benefit of doing what you can to hold on to your key talent. Having said that, I also learned that when drastic change is needed, don't procrastinate, as it could result in the failure of your entire business and lose all your jobs. It took 6 to 7 years to build the depth of the team back to the point where I felt we had the same capabilities as we did prior to the GFC. Along the way was a lot of heartache, frustration, as we struggled to find and train the people we needed. Another key learning from the GFC was growth is great, but not at the total expense of profit. Construction in any form is fraught with the risk of bleeding margin once the project starts. Investing in the best pricing software and systems, as well as ensuring that those responsible for controlling pricing and finance truly understand how to price for profit. The reason many building companies failed in the GFC was that they were busy going into it due to strong cash flow and poor cost awareness and accounting practices, they did not know they were running at a loss. It was the bust that followed the boom that uncovered this awful truth. The final learning from GFC that we have brought into the COVID crisis is that to go back to what we are good at, adapt to the changing market demands, play on your strengths, and then tell people about them. Don't go into your shell. Get clear on your strategy and be enthusiastic about executing it. Positivity and confidence make you attractive to your clients. My work priorities have changed due to COVID. Since COVID, I've begun to concentrate more and more on empowering my team to take over the more complex aspects of running our construction businesses, with the view that in the next 2 years, they will be sustainable and will not need direct input from me day to day. I intend to focus more on my strengths and passions, which are land development, mentoring our teams, and working closely with various entities looking to combat the ever-increasing mental wellbeing issues in our industry. The general decline in community mental wellbeing has been a hot button issue for a long time now. To be working in an industry that ranks as the worst of all in suicides and negative mental health outcomes in the country is unacceptable to me. Continued identification of the key drivers and honest conversations about how we as an industry and a society can work to progress solutions is critical. Among some of the key issues that contribute to poor mental health in construction members are the boom and bust cycle of construction work. This leads to huge stress, both financial when times are tough, and then the stress of too much work when things are too busy. Conflicting demands of clients expecting lower costs, higher quality, and quicker build timeframes can overwhelm those who don't have the training and skills to manage these expectations. The physical demands on a tradesperson over time can cause long-term loss of function and increased pain, leading to breakdowns, both physical and nervous, and people having to leave the industry in despair. A continued prevailing negative impression of those who are struggling with mental health continues to encourage those struggling to keep things under wraps until they have become very bad. These are just some of the complex drivers behind our terrible mental health stats in the construction industry. Over the years, I have had to directly intervene twice to safeguard the well-being of my team members. In both instances, the person was aware of their declining health, but either unable or unwilling to acknowledge it to other people or to ask for help. Had I not confronted the men directly and facilitated appropriate support to enable them to regain their mental health, I strongly suspect they could have become another statistic. Both are talented, capable, and intelligent human beings. They simply lack the confidence to reach out, the sense of security. At one point or another, their fear of what other people might think and say was stronger than the fear of ending their lives. I cannot stress enough how powerful and helpful it is when a leader or a colleague is willing to extend a hand in support and simply say, "I've got you, mate. Let's see what we can do to make you feel better." We need to let go of the fear of how we ourselves may be perceived by the person suffering. The most important thing is that they know we are there, they know we care, and that we do so without judgment. We have an opportunity, if we all get on board, to turn a real problem into a real success story. We just have to be willing to be more compassionate, more human. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Campbell. Really appreciate such a challenging and also positive start to this discussion. One of the things that strikes me as you, at the start of your presentation, went through some of the examples of the decisions that you made, particularly during lockdown, is that basically what you were doing is kind of changing the story or changing the narrative around COVID for your team. And I guess that's one of the challenges that we've seen over the last few weeks, is that people are absorbing so much noise, so much content, so many predictions about what may or may not happen. And a challenge for our leaders is to actually shape that story and to take it in a more positive direction, so that people in our teams have something to hold on to that actually facilitates the growth and the change and the decisions that we need to make in order to navigate this period of uncertainty. So we'd love to talk about that a little bit more later, and also open up a discussion around some of the mental health challenges in the sector that Campbell mentioned there. But for now, let's move on to our next presentation, but we'd love for your questions to keep coming through. If you've got a question for Campbell, we'd love to have you submit that via our chat and question function. So our next presentation is from Aidan Jury. Aidan is Sales, Marketing and Franchise Director at Genian Homes. Aidan is responsible for the whole Genian network across the country. He's a member of the residential working group, and he's recently worked to develop construction protocols for the residential sector during COVID. He's here to tell us about that work and also about how we can future-proof the sector. Welcome, Aidan.
Good afternoon, and thank you, team. Welcome, everybody. Look, I started right back at the beginning this afternoon in terms of some of the preparation for this presentation, and I was asked to think about really what resilience stood for and meant. So I went back and looked at the definitions, and resilience really is all about a capacity to rebound from difficulty, or the ability of an object to spring back into shape. And that means different things to different people. That might just mean simply surviving COVID, or it might mean coming up with a more optimistic change in the business at the other end. For myself, certainly I'm looking from a more optimistic perspective. So I'd rather actually take that definition of resilience and tip it on its head. Rather than come out with a need to rebound, why not switch that definition around totally and think about the capacity to be proactive to fend off any need to rebound from any difficulty in the first place. Now, for some that means new systems, for some that means simply driving cost out of your business, but this may also mean bringing back some old projects that you've shelved or projects that have been parked for some time. One of the great things I saw during first lockdown and also our recent semi-lockdown has been QSs, for example, working on their BOQs, driving out costs and ensuring that their waste minimisation is driven right down to zero. We all know that there's a major recycling drive through New Zealand, but there's also a massive waste issue on sites. So saving $1 to make $1 has been a great step change, I think, as we work through COVID. COVID, however, though, is sadly occupying a really large part of our memory and operating, or if you like, taking a lot of our capacity to think clearly. And we know that New Zealand suffers from any positive news. So COVID's been a massive news. It's been sensationalised in many ways, and naturally it's become more prevalent in an election period. Now, I'm not an anxious person, but I admit that if I wandered around listening to commentators all day, I'd probably fall into the trap of thinking it was all too hard. Well, the answer is that we need to listen to some of these commentators, take them with a bit of grain of salt, and however, take notice of the fact that they're all softening with their resolve, looking towards a bit of a softer landing and perhaps a bit of a shorter, sharper bounce. Now, I'm determined to lead a team that are totally empowered to come out of COVID stronger than we went in. Now, I remind myself regularly that we do live in New Zealand and that most of the rest of the world would love to live on our little islands called New Zealand. And we'll get through this stronger than when we went in. In 2 or 3 years' time, we'll look back, we'll remember that 2020 was a terrible year, to quote our Prime Minister, but it's crystallised the need for an underperforming sector to take a large jolt towards greater productivity. We're also privileged that the residential construction sector, versus many, in the main, has been able to operate reasonably unhindered. Now, I've been asked many times why I think that the residential construction sector is so resilient. The Residential Master Builders Association has done a great job of reminding us that the construction sector is the third largest sector in New Zealand. It's contributing $20 billion towards our GDP, and we're the fastest, or we were the fastest coming out of the blocks when we came out of lockdown 1. So by definition, we were resilient. Residential construction also accounts for 60% of the construction sector revenue and employs 80% of all the construction apprentices. Now, the BCITO are telling us that apprentice numbers are at record levels. They're up about 3,000 on this time last year, and that's a gain that's been assisted by the Apprenticeship Boost Scheme. That's something that I think we should all be very proud of. Finance has never been cheaper, and if you listen to commentators, it will continue to get cheaper. Property has always been a safe bet in New Zealand coming out of any major events, but I do question the availability of cheap finance and some of the challenges of our finance system as it learns to go into what may be a negative OCR period. Anybody who can possibly do so really wants to invest in New Zealand at the moment. And if you listen to the commentators, that's about 40 to 79,000. So that's a big gap. So it depends on who you believe, of people wanting to come back and invest in bricks and mortar in New Zealand. The added benefit with doing that when you come back to New Zealand is, of course, you get an extra 14 days holiday on the way back in. But we know that people are desperate to return to New Zealand any way they can and invest in reasonably safe investments. Renovation inquiry is huge, new home inquiry is solid, existing stocks are low, and prices are holding up. And in fact, we're seeing the growth, particularly outside of the main centres, being quite prolific. Our next challenge is going to be thinking about what's becoming quite predictable, insufficient supply of land as we start to run out of stock, not to mention increased pressure on the demand of our three waters ageing infrastructure that we have through New Zealand. But the reality is, if you didn't turn on the radio, you didn't look at the Herald, we didn't listen to stuff, you probably would honestly wonder what all the fuss was about at the moment. Now, I'm not complaining for 1 minute that we're out of the woods yet, but I want to spend my last few remaining minutes focusing on some thoughts that may hopefully assist us all to steer past some of the challenges that may be still coming our way. Campbell talked about team very well, and there's nothing more important to me than growing a team and creating the opportunity for that team to think about their own growth and take the opportunities to grow over time. We need to pick our winners, and we need to keep our winners close. You can never over-communicate with the team, and you can never ask them enough how they're feeling. As Campbell mentioned, we need to ask, we need to ask, and we need to ask again. More importantly, we need to share a revised vision, and we need to ask for help towards that feedback. Our biggest issue at present, though, is the ability of most trades and contractors to keep up. In our supposed recession, trades are still overcommitting and burning out. If you extend your communication bubble to include not only your team of people that you employ, but your subcontractors, they're really an extension of you. Now, one of the things that I've learned over time is that I never use the word staff. The people who you employ are your team, not your staff. And by taking that word out of my vocabulary, I believe we've really changed some of the culture across some of our teams. Thinking about the resilience of customers, as an industry, we work with some amazing customers, and there's nothing more special than handing over a new home, and I'm sure a major renovation. Clients are scared though, they're anxious, and frustration through uncertainty sometimes creates unnecessary disputes. If clients were going to listen to the commentators, they're probably wondering when you were going to go broke. So right now, it's time to communicate, and communicate again with all of our clients. Campbell talked about that co-reliance between client and our teams. One of the suggestions is when you get to a contract with a client, you go back over the schedule, material and works again, and you talk about how that might be slightly different in the next period. But let's not take advantage of COVID as an excuse. Clients are getting sick of hearing this, and I certainly am. Contractually, the RMBA residential building contract is a great contract. Protect yourself and your clients as far as you can, working through as you sign in these agreements, work with the special conditions in Part 7, and put in a clause to allow you to part claim, a stage claim, if for whatever reason you're not able to go back and complete that stage because we have a change in levels. And this will help you avoid cash shocks moving forward. So if I think about resilience of sector, the government can be slow to respond. We know that from time to time. But going into lockdown 1, we've been very fortunate to be represented by the Construction Sector Accord. MB have been very aware that for every extra dollar spent on new house projects, $2.60 is reinvested back into the wider economy. Now, I've personally been fortunate to work with some pretty great members of the residential working group to develop the site protocols for operation under different levels. And as Campbell said, immediately this group defined what best practice for health and safety look like, including tracing protocols, site hygiene, and audit process. Now, it's been refreshing to see essentially what as a group of competitors work together, sharing the best elements of their business to develop site protocols. And we need to thank MB though for embracing these protocols and quickly enabling our residential sector to get back to work. For many businesses, they're also further operating site management tools through app-based technology, which has been a massive step change, which hopefully will become sustainable over time on all sites. Now, I get really excited when I go out on sites and I see all the red printed protocols. This is a solid reminder to me that there can never ever be any intellectual property in health and safety. Chaz and Zed has taken over the administration of these protocols now, and that's resulted in a much broader pan-industry involvement, which is certainly welcome. The latest round of Level 3 and Level 2 weekly checklists that have been launched through Chaz and Zed just this week is again an example of the industry working together and should be your badge of honour as you illustrate your commitment to best practice on sites. Now, the enforcement of these protocols are likely to come through many forms. It may come through BCAs, refusing to enter your sites until you can prove to them that you've got best options for health and safety in place, or it might come through social media warriors who are very quick to go out there and talk about protocols that they think are being ignored. Many industry sectors we know are envious of our residential construction sector, which has been functioning at 80% through most of the recent months. They're a bit jealous of what we typically see, so I'm sure that they'll like it to be known if they think that we're not doing something right. So let's get out there together and educate our clients on what to expect. And let's get out and educate each other on what our new required consistent standards look like. Now, another example of resilience that comes to mind is the implementation of Artisan. Artisan provides a complete infrastructure for remote site inspections. Now, Artisan is part of the Brands Transformation Project. This work has been done. It's been quite a big investment made, and Artisan's been around for some time now, and it's been trialled by a few BCAs. Artisan should now become an accelerated national initiative and one positive outcome for COVID. Artisan not only provides a speed advantage on all sites, but it provides thorough documentation, not only on quality assurance, but also full documentation and a good record of works. Now, this is an option, or in my opinion, that we can't afford to have enough of. I think about resilience of brand. I've been really fortunate to look after a national strong brand. Every one of our businesses teaches each other something, and the solutions within the teams are prevalent. One of the things I've learned is that innovative solutions are closer than you think when you look within your business. Few things are original, so be prepared to look within and share. There's certainly strength in numbers. We should also remind ourselves of the strength and the growth of the Residential Master Builders brand, with its over 100 years history, its 6 regional hubs, and its 28 branches. Just resilience of leadership for a minute, and Campbell talked about this well. One of the things I've learned, if you don't go first, you can't expect your team to follow, but you need to ensure you've got people around that you can talk to. Often, this will be your extended team. Maybe that's not your accountant, because perhaps I might have a bit more of a conservative approach at the moment. For myself, resilience of family. Talk to your family. Take them on the journey with you and keep them close. If you don't have your family around, maybe go and find one. Finally, a resilience of self. And again, I think Campbell put that pretty well. Never look down, always look up. When we look up and we have a vision, people will follow. Now, we know COVID will change the way many companies go to market. Some will change for the better and cement a good quality step change moving forward. But I know that people that come out of this COVID situation, the same situation as they are or as they went in, they certainly will have, quite frankly, wasted a good crisis. I look forward to taking some questions from the panel, but team, kia kaha.
Thank you very much, Aidan. Much appreciated. And I love that key message from earlier in your presentation. You can never over-communicate with your team. So the message is keep talking throughout this period. That's one of the themes, I guess, that's come out of both Aidan and Campbell's presentations. So we've got time now for a panel discussion. We've got your questions already coming in, just so that you're aware. Those questions are not displayed publicly, but they are coming through to our team here, and I can see them as well. So I'm going to feed them to our panelists. So we're going to bring back Campbell and also Aidan and 3 other panelists who are joining us. We have David Kelly, the CEO of Master Builders, well known to many of you. We also have Judy Keith-Brown. She's the president of Te Kahui Whaihanga, New Zealand Institute of Architects. And we have Professor Wayne Zeng. He started Chancellor Construction. So let me introduce our extra panelists, and then we can hand over to them. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you've just heard as well. So Judy is a housing specialist. She's worked on a wide range of projects, including new houses, public housing, and restoration projects. She's also taught design for over a decade at Victoria University. As for Wayne, he started Chancellor Construction in 2012 with a focus on delivering affordable, quality homes, and also, in particular, helping first home buyers get into the market. So, Wayne, let's start with you. Thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts on what you've just heard from Campbell and from Aidan?
Thank you very much for inviting. Is my voice okay?
Yes, yes, it is.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the panel. Very inspiring speeches by both Campbell and Aidan. I think the message is very clear, and for us, it is important to, with the whole COVID crisis, it is important to stay engaged with our staff, with our teams, and also our customers. And as a young company, I think it makes us rethink that in building construction, comfort zone is a good zone. We turn over about for the last 2-3 consecutive years, we turn over about 100 homes a year, and keeping that level of building activities within our business is absolutely key. So very, very inspiring speeches, and the key message I took out of it is staying engaged with your stakeholders right through the whole process.
Great, thank you, Wayne. Judy, let's go to you. What were your thoughts on what you heard from Campbell and Aidan?
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, I thought both Aidan and Campbell came up with a lot of extremely good points, and a lot of them I agreed with. Like when lockdown happened, I probably worried more about the builders that I work with than I did about my own children, which both boys weren't that impressed with. But I see my role as an architect as part of a team, and my team hung together right through lockdown. My builders and my subbies and my clients and me stayed in touch right through that whole time, comparing notes, thinking about what we could do to keep going. We talked about how important people's houses were. Like, to me, our houses are our most important buildings, and our homeowners and tenants are our most important clients. So that whole team issue, which both Campbell and Aidan talked about, is top of my list, along with really good communication, and people being honest and sharing ideas and being generous with their ideas rather than just hogging it all to themselves. So yeah, I thought all of the things that both of you talked about was really outstanding, and I loved the honesty with which you both spoke. So thank you so much for sharing all of the things that you did with us. A lot of it rang true with me, and I think one of the things that happened for me was that it just slowed me down and made me realise how privileged I am to be an architect in New Zealand and to be working with such good residential builders, and such good clients and such good subbies. You know, I just felt incredibly grateful for choosing to go into this job and continuing to do so. But thank you so much, you two. That was really terrific. Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. David Kelly, let's get a quick word from you. What were your thoughts on what you heard?
Oh, look, I've had quite a bit to do with both Aidan and Campbell over the last 2 to 3 years, so not surprised at the very thoughtful way that they've gone through it. I just want to pick up on a couple of things that were commented on. One that Aidan raised about the construction accord, and I guess at a personal level, I had quite a bit to do with that. And it came into its own, and my reflection is, apart from what individual businesses are doing, the importance of the industry working together. So it's not just builders, whether they're residential or commercial builders, it's architects, engineers, dare I say it, there's even the odd lawyer involved. We let one or two in just, because otherwise they'll cause mischief if they're not. But actually it's really important, and Aidan talked about, and I think Campbell might have talked about, the back to work protocols that were developed, and it was the generosity of spirit of people saying we need to put aside our selfish interest because we all need to do this, and I think we need to find a way to keep that going, because the construction industry has not been good at that. And I think it surprised a lot of us, and it surprised government officials, the fact we were able to do those protocols ahead of many other industries. We could get back to work because we had the confidence of government and of the officials. We need to stay at that level, and that's going to be one of our big challenges, how we're honest about that stuff and brave enough to keep doing it.
Thanks very much, David. We're having your questions coming through now, so let's crack into those. Aidan, I'd like to come to you first. We're talking about uncertainty, right? We're in an environment where there are many things that are outside our control, hard to predict. Humans don't tend to do particularly well with uncertainty. Tell me about some of the decisions that you guys have made within Genian, and how have you actually made the decisions that you talked about in your presentation in light of the fact that there is still so much that we don't know about what the next few months have in store?
I think, Campbell, it's very important to slow down, to take that extra bit of time. As I made the comment, you know, when you get to a contract stage with a client, go back over it again. It's standard protocol to spend time between the contract and the scheduled material works and certainly the plans. But I think it's important to talk about what may happen in the short term. Be open about the fact if we do experience changes in levels, we have this covered. We know what to do. We have this under control. We've been here before, and we've got very clear protocols in place that have been worked through and that have been endorsed by MB. So we're not going into this or any future changes with our eyes closed.
Wayne, one of the challenges is around client expectations. Client expectations are hard to navigate at the best of times. What are the implications of COVID, and how can we actually have those conversations in a way that makes sure that everyone's actually on the same page?
I think our clients have been very supportive of what we have been through as a builder. It is fair to say that our clients have actually been part of the whole journey with us, and that's how we gain our confidence. Communication with the clients is, for instance, we put a lot of thinking and actions into the communication, the actual communications with our customers during COVID and post-COVID. Some of the examples that we have here is our teams have a regular weekly update with drone photo footage. One of the sites that we have at the moment is a combination of 61 built at various different stages. So to keep our clients well informed during that level 3, the second lockdown, sort of controlled building environment, something like a drone photo, a LinkedIn, a Dropbox link with daily updates has been working very, very well with us. Our clients are actually, there's no much of impact on the program, and generally our clients have been very, very happy and supportive of what we've been through.
Thanks, Wayne. Judy, what have you noticed over the last few months? We know that when there is a downturn or a period of challenge, architects is often one of the first groups to be affected. What are you seeing and hearing?
During lockdown, people definitely were affected, but what's happened now is, especially in the residential area, and I think Aidan and Campbell both raised it, renovation work has just gone crazy. Like people, even as we were speaking just now, I just got 2 more people asking me if I needed some more work. So my workload has probably gone up about 300%, which is pretty crazy. And at the moment, the reason that I'm in Dunedin is because the NZIA Te Kahui Whaihanga is doing a series of workshops around the country about building consent issues. And so as we go, we're talking to people. So we've been talking to people in Queenstown and Dunedin and Christchurch, and we're heading up to the North Island next week. But what we're seeing at the moment is architects are actually quite busy, but what they're worried about is what's going to happen within 6 months. Is that all just going to slow down? What we're hoping is that there'll be a parallel work stream of not just projects ready to go on site now, but there'll be work for all of the builders for hopefully the next sort of 18 months to sort of 3 years. So that's what people are worried about, is more what's going to happen in a year's time. And what architects are also realising too is that this is a great opportunity to talk with people about sustainable design, because during lockdown, everyone was at home and sort of realised that we actually need to be a little bit more careful with our planet and make better use of our resources. So there's quite a lot of exciting thought going on. Yeah, so it's an interesting time, and we're just trying to keep everybody happy and employed at the moment.
Campbell, one of the things I thought was really interesting in your presentation was you mentioned that you'd actually quadrupled your marketing budget during lockdown. Tell me a little bit more about the thinking behind that and the impact of that.
Yeah, we it was very counterintuitive when we started to think about it initially, but the logic behind it really was quite simple. Obviously, working with our existing pipeline of clients during the lockdown gave us a sense of people's energy and I guess future views. And there was obviously a mix. Some people were going ahead regardless, some were nervous. And we started to get a little bit of organic inquiry in the latter half of lockdown. And we realized that, you know, not everyone is the same. There's people at different stages with different attitudes and different circumstances. So let's really tap into those that are sitting at home and reflecting about their long-term future. And I think Judy just touched on that around people looking at their lifestyle and where they live. Do they want to live in a large city? Do they want to move to the provinces? You know, I'm fortunate to live 50, 100 meters from the beach and in a provincial town. And we had complete freedom to walk in half a dozen beautiful tracks and parks and of course the beach. And it really made us truly grateful and realize how blessed we were to live where we live. And I think that's happened throughout the world. So with that in mind, and of course we didn't feel we had anything to lose except a bit of money. We had plenty of time, even though we were still busy doing other things. We had this time to be creative. So we pulled our consultants in and our own team, and we just came up with ideas. And our decision really was just to tell a few stories, to share good, positive logic as to why building was a good time. And hey, why not, while you're locked at home, start the dream underway, get it underway, you know, start sketching, start looking at securing that section. And that marketing angle really resonated with people, and they got off their backsides and off we went. So to be fair, it was, at the end of the day, it became a logical thing to do, to invest in. And I think it's well known, you know, if everyone else is running that way, go the other way and you might find opportunity. So we're not talking, you know, millions of dollars of marketing budget here, because we're coming from probably a fairly moderate base because we were already busy. And I've come to believe that you've got to have a good marketing framework so that when you need to turn the taps on, if you're looking at your workflow 8 months down the track, you can really leverage it up at that point in time and anticipate what your pipeline looks like, say in April next year, and actually manage your inquiry off and on as needed, so that you're not overwhelmed, but that you're not too thin on the ground 8 months later. And so we just concentrated a few months of investment into sort of 6 weeks, and it paid dividends.
So that storytelling piece is really interesting. David, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. What are you hearing from your members? Particularly, I guess one of the themes that we're seeing in these conversations is people who've chosen to be proactive, people who've chosen to try and tell an alternate narrative to what people are absorbing and hearing from all these other sources, which can be quite negative and quite disempowering, really, quite toxic. What do you see as the benefits for people who actually step into that storytelling space in a more proactive way and try and explore what an alternative future would look like, David?
Oh, there's so many stories. I guess I'll start with maybe not the narrative, but the attitude. And I think we've heard probably 3 or 4 examples today of taking advantage of the COVID lockdown rather than seeing it as a problem. So Campbell's just talked about the marketing and investing, actually, not a whole lot of money, but actually taking some time to say, we should be doing this now. Now, the question is, why does it take a COVID lockdown for the industry to do that? I'm not saying that that's the only time Campbell's done it, but actually we should be doing this all the time as businesses. Wayne's example of the drone footage and sending it to clients, I think is fantastic. It's not massively expensive. It's just hey, let's think a little bit about this. Now, how do we keep that sort of stuff going? That's an attitudinal thing, I think, Jahan. I had a conversation, it was when we came back from level 4 to level 3, and I was going for a walk and ran into one of our members who was going for a walk with his partner. Now, they're a commercial contractor in the Hutt Valley. And I said, well, how are you feeling about things? And he said, fantastic. We've had this time and we've completely rethought how we do our business. So we're coming out of level 4 feeling very, very confident about the future. And he said, you know, the one depressing thing, he said, I was talking to someone else who's also a builder and said to that builder, what have you done during the lockdown? Oh, I painted my house, which is great, but there was nothing about the business. So that was a good, you know, in itself was a nice story about the confidence that they had, because they'd thought about the future and they thought this is, you know, it's all looking good. And they're very realistic about the challenges. Not sure if that is your question, but that was my answer.
That's your answer, and I'll take it, David. Thanks for that. Let's move on to a wider discussion now. We've talked about where things have been at over the last few months and some of the lessons that we've taken from this period. Let's now talk about how we can build that resilience into our businesses and our people. And as we round off the discussion, we'll talk a little bit about the opportunity that COVID presents to address some of the long-standing issues in the sector, some of the issues that we've discussed at Constructive over the past couple of years. Judy, we have a question coming through from one of our participants who touches on your comments about sustainability. The person says, how do we have the conversation about sustainability when it can cost more?
There's sustainability and there's sustainability. I'm not sort of talking about passive house levels. I'm just talking about, especially in alteration work and that sort of thing, being sensible about how you maybe double glaze windows, or how you put black polythene under the house to stop rising damp, or like the work that I do is mainly on renovations of existing houses, and there are ways of doing it that don't cost the earth. The thing about good sustainable design is that you might pay a little bit more at the beginning, but in the long run, your heating costs and energy use go down. So you have to kind of bite the bullet at the beginning to get the results in the long run. So I'm not talking about over the top sustainable design, but I'm just thinking about that. And also in terms of new build, I guess I'm thinking about good planning, good orientation on site, making the use of solar gain, building a house that protects an outdoor space from the wind, just really thinking things through at a very careful level so that you don't rush a design. You actually really think about making a house warm and comfortable for the people that live in them. So sort of not repeating the mistakes that people made back in the 60s and 70s with our housing stock. Like improving our housing stock is what I think we need to do.
Aidan, one of the things you touched on in your presentation was this idea of revisiting old projects, or really trying to look outside the box, looking outside your current pipeline of work. How do you encourage your team to step into that space and have those conversations when they may already be feeling risk averse, understandably, because of what's going on, and wanting to sort of hunker down and hold on to what is certain and what's right in front of them?
Look, I don't think it matters how big your team is or how small your team is. We're fortunate that we've got lots of great teams that can come together and share. And out of all of those sharing opportunities come, you know, maybe a few small embers that we can fan together to make quite strong. But for people that are the smaller businesses out there, you know, the innovation comes from within. You've just got to look a little bit closer. We all know what to do. And in times when people are running so quickly, they never get back to look at those projects. And I think the people that, using David's analogy, the builder that painted his house probably didn't get a gain. I personally got frustrated during the lockdown period, where a lot of people said, I hope you had a bit of time off. Well, no, we all worked a lot harder than we've probably ever done to be ready to come out the other end in a hurry and show that resilience. So it's not, I don't think it's hard. I don't think, as I said before, nothing's really ever original. There's so many good costing systems out there as examples that people have started to invest in but never quite finished. Just take the time to do it now, because we're going to need it. Because as Judy said, it's most probably not the next 6 or, in fact, the next 6 to 8 to 9 months where people are looking for work. It's what comes beyond that.
Thanks, Aidan. Campbell, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on, off the back of your presentation, talking about mental health, some of the more practical aspects of that in your organisation. What does it look like for you to support members of your team around mental health? What are some of the things that you do?
Well, it's not rocket surgery, Jahan. It really isn't. It's actually, I think it's just about courage. It's about empathy and having your eyes open and being willing to ask a question. It's really that simple. Any change that needs to happen to start to turn around our tendency in our industry and of course the wider community, but just if we're looking at construction as a single industry, I think it starts with attitudes. It starts with a bit of understanding and empathy. And if we can start with ourselves, from my own experience, I suffered a bout of very unpleasant depression a few years ago. We had a young family. I was building a ridiculously difficult house on a hill in the middle of winter, starting a new company, and the other businesses were growing really, really fast. And fundamentally, I ended up almost in a heap in bed, really. And it took a long time to dig my way out of that. And actually, I shouldn't say I dug my way out of it. My wife dug me out of it and then kicked me in the butt. And I got going again. And it was my wife's empathy and understanding, but at the same time, a little bit of a push in the back to start acknowledging the things that weren't quite right, and the effect that was having on the family. That's what got me to the point where I was a little bit more aware. And I think it's the same for other people. It's just acknowledging the issue without judgment, just acknowledging it, and then making it clear that there are options to work through from there, and providing support and guidance where you can. I don't suggest that we all become psychologists and psychotherapists. It is literally just being human, peer-to-peer support, talking to each other, making ourselves available. I think it's that simple. And that's what I try to practice in our own business. I'm not always perfect at it. Sometimes I let my own workload perhaps distract me from my team a little bit, but I certainly make a conscious effort to lift my head up and find out how things are going in people's lives, and to remember what's going on, what are the problems, and to just check in. And I feel if we can do that, it stops the potential for so much more dramatic outcomes later on.
Wayne, how do you look after the mental well-being of your team?
I'm a believer that small teams can deliver more, and it's fortunate that within our office here and our sites, we have a relatively small number of people that I can go around on a regular basis and actually have a chat with them about things, about the program, about what's important for the week, the priorities and things like that. I suppose many have been discussed previously by Campbell. Having that open dialogue with your team members and keeping them informed, I suppose, with the decisions and the strategy that the company is making is important to our wider member groups, including the contractors and professionals. So communication, I suppose, is how we do it. And I'm not saying that we're doing it right, but we certainly have made a good start, and our guys we believe that our engagement level is pretty high.
Judy, there's a lot of focus, I guess, for leaders at the moment on how their teams are doing and how their teams are coping. And we've talked a little bit about that today, about the messaging, about the need to communicate, the fact that you can't over-communicate with your team. At the same time, leaders themselves are facing challenges and uncertainty about everything that's going on. How do leaders strike that balance of both looking after their teams and being proactive, but also not sidelining their own mental health needs, and also their ability to say sometimes, I don't know, or I need a break, or I'm struggling?
It's such a good question, but quite a complicated question. what I do is, and you can probably tell, I'm completely honest about where I'm at and how I'm feeling about things. So I'm quite open to people, and I tell them the truth about how I'm feeling. And having been a teacher and also an assessor for the Registered Architects Board and so on, I've dealt with a lot of young architects and young graduates and students and so on across the country. So I've sort of turned into a bit of a mentor for many of them. And so when they come and talk to me, I'm completely honest with them about how I'm feeling. You know, if I'm feeling a little bit worried about something, I say that. But I also say, look, it's going to be okay. You know, we're going to get through this and we're all in it together. And I guess one of the strong messages I put across to people is it's not just your job that's important. It's also your partner, it's your family, it's your friends. You know, you've got to look at your whole life, not just your job. Your job is important, but actually you're the most important thing, and your kids are really important, and your partner is really important. So yes, you know, things might not be that great at work or whatever, but your focus doesn't just have to be on your job. So it's about looking after your whole being. During lockdown, Ewan, my husband, he's another architect, and me, Ewan had to lay 4 people off from his office, which was really awful, really, really hard work. And so I really had to hold him together during that time. And similarly with other people, had to do the same thing. And so, you know, my sort of advice was a bit like what Campbell was talking about, you know, eat properly, go for a walk, have some time out, breathe some fresh air, just look after yourself. And with the NZIA Te Kahui Whaihanga, what we're doing now is offering to our graduates 3 EAP sessions for free, so they can go and get advice on counselling or finance, whatever they need, and the uptake on that is really good. But yeah, it's just telling your stories about how you've got through recessions in the past, and making sure that you look after yourself as a whole person. Bottom line, really.
Thanks, Judy. Aidan, we've touched a little bit on some of the lessons from the global financial crisis and previous events. Is there a sense of reassurance that we can actually draw from that, perhaps to a greater degree than we currently have, in our messaging and our storytelling, to remind people that we've actually been through challenges before, and sort of telling the story of how we got through those challenges?
I think if you look at the barometers or the indicators or statistics we see from most commentators, Jahan, just look at the softening of property prices, but look at how quickly they've come back. Even look now, if you look at the valuations that are coming through, we know that the safety in bricks and mortar in New Zealand, and people understand that. I think we just have to remind them a little bit more. So there's some fantastic research and statistics out there. But you know, this time round, as opposed to the GFC, we're coming into this thing so well in terms of the finance cost. So I just think we take advantage of every opportunity that's out there, and make sure we put our best foot forward. But I think, as I said before, the challenge is getting ready for some of the issues that are coming, like the infrastructure that I don't think will cope with this pending or pent-up demand, and land shortage. So let's jump forward 6 months and think about, you know, how we get ready for some of those other issues that are coming our way.
David, there's a question here from someone who's asking whether there's an appetite for the sharing of resources across the country for your members based on some of the issues that we've discussed today. They've also asked, having a register where companies could list available builders and also those who need workers. What are your thoughts on that, David?
Certainly there's an appetite for it. I guess the question is, what sort of resources are we talking about? At a regional level, there are some local initiatives about sharing resources, sharing staff or labour. It's tended to be done at a local level because I think that's where it has to happen, really. You can't really do that at a national level. I think the resourcing thing is an interesting one, and be really interested and very open to any ideas we've got about that. I think what we've certainly tried to do over the last few years is to develop some more thoughts about what are the key things to running a good business. So resourcing and that sort of resource and knowledge resource. Can I just go back the question you had to Aidan, and in the spirit of, I think, of being honest about things, while I think there are some good lessons to be learned about what has gone right for individual businesses, what we also need to learn from previous recessions is what hasn't gone right for the industry or the sector as a whole. And so a lot of the work that's gone on through the Accord and Master Builders, I think, has pushed this as hard as we can for residential is, I think one of the speakers at the beginning talked about the importance of the residential construction sector for New Zealand in terms of our economy, in terms of employment, and we had some work recently done by Sense Partners that we've been putting out there. Residential construction has one of the highest economic multipliers. So $1 spent in residential construction has a big multiplier into the economy. Same for employment. And one of the very strong points that's made in the report is austerity does not work. It actually only makes things worse. So one of the things that as an industry we need to collectively understand, and I think push for, is for government to think about what are the right policy settings and incentives for consumers so that they do what Aidan has said and recognise there are opportunities for building, because it can switch very quickly. So let's be honest about that, and that's builders, it's designers, it's property developers, etc. Really getting their head around what's important and being consistent. I go back to my comment at the beginning, we haven't been good historically as an industry, and if we don't work together, then we die separately or hang separately, as they say.
Thank you, David. Let's round off today's conversation by talking about some of the long-standing issues in the sector that we've been talking about and how they look now in this COVID or post-COVID world. Judy, one of the issues that we've heard a lot about in the last few years is the nature of the houses that we're building, where we're building them. Are you seeing enough discussion around that during this period, or would you like to see more public debate around this?
I'd like to see more public debate around this, especially coming from Wellington, where we've just had our new spatial plan announced with a whole lot of 6-storey or up to 6-storey buildings going through a lot of our inner residential areas. Not sure that that's so brilliant, especially given the COVID situation in apartment buildings in Melbourne and so on. I think there should be a lot more discussion about houses and making sure that we build houses that last. I live in an 1887 house and it's still going strong. Admittedly, it's had a few bits and pieces fixed on it, but it's still a really good house. I think we've got a lot of very smart young architects coming up with some pretty clever houses. I'm not completely convinced about the small house design sort of that's coming through. I'm not sure that people who were in lockdown would have enjoyed living in 30 square metres. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, because I think that with COVID and with other viruses that are going to come through in the future, our housing stock's really going to have to be a lot more flexible, because we're going to have to start thinking about how people can work from home, because I think that's going to become more common. And I think we're going to be going a little bit back to how probably our grandmothers used to live, and really relying on good kitchens and good dining rooms and that sort of thing, because I think we will be spending more time in our homes. Sounds like a bit of an aside, but during lockdown, I got hold of a number of clients and asked them about how they actually, adapted their houses to work in during lockdown. And maybe it was sort of a marketing tool, I didn't really realise. But now a number of them have come back to me asking for to redesign bits of their houses so that they can accommodate a workspace. So I think there's going to be a lot of really good discussion around alternative ways of building our houses.
Thanks, Judy. Wayne, what about some of the conversations that we've been having around those sector-wide issues around consenting, around skills shortages, for example? What do you see as the impact of COVID, if any, on where those wider conversations are at? Are we finding ourselves in a position where we're having to rethink some of those?
What we are having, the conversations that we're having at the moment with most of our customers is group building consent applications, and that has been actually working, the strategy's actually been working quite well with council. So if anything, I think our focus is affordable, small sort of housing projects. If anything, I think we are experiencing a faster turnaround at council with these type of consents. So and the way with inspections, sampling inspections, and group bookings and all that have also helped us. Of a recent project that we run at the moment, 61 homes. The first SP is on track for handover, and that's only been about just under 200 days, which is about just over 6 months. So in our little our catchment here, we are relatively happy with what we're seeing, and continue to see a lot of projects like this going through council. One of the learnings that we've had with this is that as a builder, we have been very involving pre-lodgement process with council, in the pre-lodgement process with council. So it has not. It's never a surprise to council. We've been keeping them well informed with the project before the build and during the build. So so far, what we're seeing is pretty positive.
David, there's a question here. Are master builders talking to the government re the Resource Management Act to make it easier for the construction sector to push developments through and be more cost effective?
The answer is yes. Yep, it's an area in the last 18 months we've taken a lot greater interest. I think historically we've sort of thought, oh, the RMA is not our thing, it's more the Building Act, but no, very much. And Aidan, I think you referred to, both Aidan and Campbell are on the residential working group, and we tested that with them last year. So yeah, much more active, along with building consents, because I see them actually, they mesh in together. You know, if you fix one and not the other, you haven't really got very far.
Campbell, just coming back to some of Judy's comments there, are you seeing a change in client expectations in terms of what we build and how we build?
Absolutely. I think a few key things are happening around the use and function of homes. It's already talked about the multifaceted needs of a home, particularly if we're going to be periodically or long-term working from home. So definitely, just today a client, I believe, requested adding a bedroom to their design to make it a fully functional office, calling it a bedroom, but at the end of the day, it's an office. And I feel that that's inevitable. Also, the comment around tiny homes, I think there's a distinction between tiny and small, or tiny and space efficient. So got to be clear there. But I think that the reality, if you're stuck in a particularly confined space for a long period of time, it's not sustainable. So appropriate use of space and layout, form and function is critical. As Judy said, you know, aspect to sun and views, wind, all of those things, they just need to be given careful consideration. And I feel that over the last few years, there's been a tendency where cost is the common priority that's spoken about. But we need to be talking about value, and we need to be talking about the return on lifestyle. I think there's a really, really important conversation to be had, that we don't just drive costs down to the point where we lose the heart and the soul and the true value of our homes. And that goes across building products, design methodology, the whole thing. And so I like to use the word investment. If you're living in a home for 15 to 20 years, you invest in the quality of those things to not only increase your enjoyment, but to increase your equity, because your home will be worth more in 15 years than it would have been if you cut all those corners. So I really think careful thought across the industry needs to be given to how much we value our homes.
Aidan, how do we have that conversation with customers, with clients, and how do we reorient the conversation away from purely being about cost into that lifestyle piece and the wider values around the property?
I think you need to understand clients a bit more, Jahan, and ask the right questions, drill down into family. As Campbell just said, if people come into a home for 15 to 20 years, that home's going to operate very differently in the future to what it is today. And whether that's, to Judy's point, sustainable solutions, potentially maybe solar or electric vehicles and that sort of thing, it's all got to be considered right now, and you've got to future-proof it as best as you can. But one thing I do know, that, and it's becoming really prevalent out of COVID, people's priorities are changing. Their life priorities are changing. You know, people have been through a fair bit. Coming out of it this time, they're going to do things better. They're going to have a better family life, and there will be a lot more people working from home. And if it's a bit like me, you know, working out of a 4x4, 4 metre by 4 metre office, after quite a few weeks, and then it does start to get smaller. The walls start to close in on you eventually. So people are creating, you know, better home office solutions. And if you're lucky like Campbell, 50 metres from the beach, you know, you've got it all going the way you need to.
Yeah, I think Campbell's got it made, hasn't he? Thanks very much, everyone, for your contributions to that discussion. And thank you at home or work or wherever you are for sending your questions in as well. That was a really valuable conversation. This discussion has been captured. It will be available on the Constructive website if you would like to watch this again or share it with somebody else in your team. Thank you for joining us for this conversation today. We've got 2 more Constructives coming up over the next couple of weeks. So next week, we have the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. We also have National's Finance Spokesperson, Paul Goldsmith. They will be sharing their plans and their vision for the sector. That will be a very interesting conversation. And then our final session on the 17th of September, we'll be talking about this concept of resilience again, but we'll be talking about how we build resilience into the industry as a whole and the buildings that we construct now and into the future. Thank you for being here. Have a great evening, and we'll see you back here at the same time next week. But until then, thank you once again to all our panelists, to Wayne, to Judy, to Campbell, to Aidan, and to David for all their thoughts and their wisdom. Have a very good evening.